We live in a constant state of becoming, always moving forward, always reaching for something more than what we currently hold. Our lives feel less like a journey and more like a frantic chase across an ever-widening horizon. We are governed by the invisible currents of expectation, the need to prove ourselves, to accumulate enough status, or to experience the perfect moment that will finally grant us peace. We scroll through images of others' supposed perfection. We see accolades, glittering parties, and landscapes promising utter fulfillment. Our minds latch onto these projections like desperate trawlers following a distant beacon. And we ask ourselves, what exactly are we running towards? Is it happiness itself? Or is it merely the fleeting echo of approval from those we admire? This constant striving creates a profound dissonance within us, a deep weariness that no amount of superficial success seems capable of soothing. The pressure to perform, to always be achieving, dictates our worth. Our sense of self becomes outsourced. It depends on external validation, likes, promotions, possessions. We build fragile identities upon the shifting sands of desire. And when these expectations fail to materialize, when the promotion falls through, or the perfect moment vanishes from the screen, the resulting void is disproportionately painful. It teaches us a terrible lesson about the nature of wanting. Wanting itself might be the primary source of our modern anxiety. We mistake anticipation for happiness. We believe that if we just attain the next thing, the title, the perfect relationship, the corner office view, that the constant striving will cease and tranquility will finally settle over us. But this is a magnificent illusion, a perpetual cycle powered by scarcity. The ancient thinkers understood something vital about desire. They saw it not as a source of life, but often as a master that enslaves the soul. True contentment, they suggested, was not found after achieving a goal, but in the redirection of our very desires themselves. The moment we recognize that the striving itself is the primary source of suffering, a quiet revolution begins within us. The modern pursuit has taught us to value magnitude. The bigger the car, the grander the event, the louder the announcement, the more valuable we feel. We have become accustomed to the spectacle of excess, mistaking intensity for fulfillment. But this chase for external validation is exhausting. It demands a perpetual expenditure of energy that leaves little room for genuine repose. We must learn to question the metrics by which we measure a life well lived. Is richness defined by accumulation? Or is it measured by the quality of attention we give to simple things? A quiet morning, a shared meal without distraction, the steady companionship of another human being, the initial noise that surrounds us, the constant pings, the unending stream of updates, the collective chorus demanding our attention, is designed to keep us alert, anxious, and therefore perpetually consumers. It keeps us in a state of readiness for the next expected stimulus. To quiet this noise requires a radical shift from an outward focus to an inward one. We must stop seeking confirmation from the crowd and start listening to the steady rhythm of our own inner landscape. We must begin to differentiate between the desires that truly sustain us, the necessity of shelter, sustenance, connection, and those that are merely fashionable anxieties inherited from society. This internal turning point is difficult because it challenges the very foundations upon which modern identity has been built. It requires admitting that much of what we believe is necessary for a good life might simply be elaborate cultural scaffolding, nothing more. The weight of expectation forces us to live lives defined by potential rather than actuality. We are always preparing for the next version of ourselves, the successful self, the influential self, the fulfilled self. But this continuous state of unactualized possibility keeps our hearts in a perpetual state of low-grade alarm, preventing them from ever settling into genuine rest. The journey towards true tranquility begins not with an epiphany of perfect knowledge, but with the simple act of noticing. To notice the restlessness, to hear the nagging whisper that tells us we are somehow lacking, despite everything we already possess. And then, gently, to acknowledge that lack is often a product of misunderstanding, rather than physical shortage. The goal, ultimately, is not the dramatic climax or the grand resolution promised by our social feeds. The goal is a sustained state of quiet presence. It is the ability to feel utterly at home with oneself, regardless of how loud the world outside may be calling for one's attention. We stood at the edge of a frantic tide. A current of modern expectation pulled us relentlessly forward. We were taught that worth was measured by accumulation, by speed, and by visibility. The feeds scrolled past, endless streams of perceived perfection, the gleaming new car, the dazzling celebration, the success metric achieved. It felt like progress, didn't it? Like if we only moved fast enough or acquired just one more thing, happiness would finally catch up to us. But beneath the bright lights and the loud cheers, a deeper truth was gathering, a quiet ache in the chest of every soul participating in this endless race. What were we actually running towards? Was it joy, or merely the next milestone? The ancient philosophers watched this frantic modern dance with weary eyes. They saw us chasing phantoms. We mistakenly equated effort with fulfillment and external applause with inner peace. The wisdom tradition whispers a warning. That wanting itself is often the source of our deepest suffering. Imagine for a moment the weight carried by aspiration. It is a colossal thing. It sits upon the shoulders of every ambitious heart, demanding constant fuel we get from more work, bigger goals, and greater sacrifice. We mistake desire for direction. We believe that happiness is a distant summit visible only after an exhausting climb. But what if joy were not a destination at all? What if it were simply the quality of breath taken in this very moment? The pursuit of pleasure, we once believed, meant lavish excess. The feasting tables, the roaring parties, the unrestrained indulgence. We pictured the good life as a constant upward curve of acquisition. But true satisfaction rarely looks like that on paper. Look closer at those gleaming images. The faces of those who achieved the peak often carry not elation, but a deep, subtle exhaustion, a hollow quality to the gaze. The great Epicurus offered us an entirely different architecture for the soul. He did not tell us to simply give up. Rather, he taught us how to fundamentally redefine what good even means. For him, pleasure was not the pursuit of sensation or the gratification of wild cravings. It was something far more subtle, quieter, and infinitely more sustainable. It was freedom from disturbance. This freedom is called ataraxia. It is not a sudden burst of joy. Rather, it is the tranquil state of having nothing left to worry about. Think of it as mental silence. The removal of the noise of expectation, the quiet settling into knowing that you are enough right now. This shift is radical. It moves the locus of control from everything external, the economy, the approval of others, the passing whims of fortune, back into the secure, silent sanctuary of our own mind. The weight of aspiration forces us to constantly compare ourselves to an unreachable ideal. We build towering structures of shoulds and musts. I should have more money. I must achieve this title. I ought to be traveling right now. Each should is a tiny knot tied around the heart, restricting breath and comfort. The philosophical journey thus begins with an act of unburdening. It requires us to examine our desires not as personal wants, but as habituated fears. We are afraid of poverty, so we crave wealth. We are afraid of being unnoticed, so we chase fame. These desires are merely emotional disguises for underlying anxieties. Epicurus urges us toward a deliberate and profound simplicity. The ultimate life is one that is self-contained, where contentment does not depend on the passing favor or failure of fortune, but on our internal cultivation. He teaches that many of our most burdensome cravings, the need for status, the desire for luxury objects, are entirely unnecessary burdens. To live well means systematically pruning away these superfluous demands. This process is an inner revision. It forces us to become masterful editors of our own minds, discerning between what truly satisfies and what merely distracts. The true measure of a life's richness is not the size of its possessions, but the depth of its quiet moments, the clarity with which it allows one to observe thought passing without attachment or panic. It asks us to reclaim our attention. Instead of scattering it across hundreds of meaningless stimuli, the notifications, the news headlines, the perceived failures of others, we learn to anchor ourselves firmly in the present moment. The ground beneath our feet, the taste of simple bread, the unhurried curve of a conversation with a friend. These are not merely moments. They become philosophical anchors. The lesson inherent in this quiet garden is that true pleasure is found at the intersection of simplicity and connection. It is found when we realize that the vast mechanisms of human suffering, the constant striving, the endless comparison, the chase for external validation, are ultimately optional. We have the radical capacity to choose a smaller circle, a gentler pace, and a deeper appreciation for what already exists around us. This choice, more than any conquest or acquisition, is the deepest form of freedom. We spent so much time running from discomfort, running towards an imagined fulfillment that always remained just out of reach. In the frantic glow of a modern life dictated by expectation, we learn to confuse motion with progress and striving with satisfaction. But there are times when the greatest movement is stillness itself. There are moments where exhaustion finally forces us to stop, to look around and ask, what exactly am I running towards? If our constant pursuit has led only to a deeper well of anxiety, perhaps the cure does not lie in more ambition or louder celebration, but in retreat, a deliberate turning away from the noise. Imagine a place outside the clamor of the agora, beyond the weight of what others expect us to achieve. Imagine an Athenian garden, sheltered and tranquil. It is here that Epicurus waited for us, not with grand pronouncements on rhetoric or politics, but with something far more intimate, wisdom whispered in the shade. This quiet space was a profound contrast to the dazzling excess we had just been showing you, the endless parties, the acquisition of status symbols, the frantic dance toward an unreachable peak. Here, beneath leafy canopies and gentle murmurings, he offered a radically different definition of a good life. His lesson was not found in doing, but in simply being. The weight we carry from our ambitions is immense. We believe that happiness must be earned through visible struggle, the perfect career, the magnificent marriage, the mountain of gold. Epicurus gently countered this notion, suggesting that these external markers are flimsy scaffolding built upon a foundation of deeper misunderstanding about human nature and what truly provides peace. We are accustomed to thinking of pleasure as something intense, fleeting, and often hedonistic, a massive feast, an intoxicating thrill. But for Epicurus, the concept was far more subtle. He redefined pleasure itself. It was not the wild, unrestrained indulgence we might mistakenly assume it to be. Rather, he articulated a state that sounds almost like negative space, pleasure as the absence of pain and the freedom from disturbance. He taught us about ataraxia. This word, meaning tranquility or imperturbability, is not merely feeling good for an hour. It is a deeply rooted stability of mind. It is the quiet certainty that worry cannot penetrate. Think of it like this. If your mind is perpetually agitated by comparison, by what your neighbor owns, by what your feed suggests you should be, you are experiencing pain, and therefore, you are not truly ataraxic. The key to unlocking this tranquility was recognizing the root cause of our suffering. It is rarely a lack of something. It is almost always an abundance of wanting, specifically, wanting things that are unnecessary or unattainable. Our desire for power, for immortal glory, for flawless beauty, these desires create an emotional chasm between us and reality. Epicurus showed us that the great work was not to acquire more external pleasures, but rather to practice a profound act of psychological subtraction. It meant pruning away the weeds of needless concern. He taught that the simplest things are often the most satisfying. The gentle companionship shared over bread and wine feels richer than the grandest banquet attended in silence. A calm conversation with a friend weighs more heavily on the soul than the acquisition of any expensive artifact. The garden thus became not just a physical place, but a metaphor for a cultivated mind. It is where we learn to live simply, nourishing only those desires that are necessary and natural. We must differentiate between the fundamental needs, sleep, sustenance, shelter, and the luxurious wants driven by cultural comparison or fear. This was a revolutionary act of mental discipline. He was asking us to retire from the competitive marketplace of desire and instead learn to govern our inner world with radical restraint. By consciously limiting our expectations, we simultaneously limit our capacity for disappointment. If we expect little, we are rarely devastated when we receive less. The silence of that garden became a corrective lens through which we could finally view our lives. The external noise faded away, replaced by the steady rhythm of contemplation. We realized that the most valuable goods were not those hoarded in vaults or displayed on pedestals, but the bonds formed between people who chose depth over breadth, and moments marked by genuine presence rather than frantic activity. And so, the promise whispered in that Athenian shade remains. True living is not about maximizing experience. It is about minimizing suffering. It is the slow, patient work of cultivating a mind that is content with sufficiency, a life gently, quietly full. If we think of the good life as some roaring bonfire, something grand and consuming, we might imagine it filled with excess, feasting to satiate every craving, or spending fortunes merely for the spectacle. We may equate pleasure with indulgence, a lavish party, a string of glorious achievements, an endless pursuit of heightened sensation. But Epicurus asks us to look deeper than the smoke and shine of momentary excitement. He invites us away from the boisterous revelry into a quiet courtyard, suggesting that our very definition of joy might be profoundly mistaken. He challenges the deeply held belief that more experience equals greater happiness. Instead, he directs our attention toward something subtler, something almost invisible to those who are constantly reaching for more. The ancients, and particularly Epicurus, teach us that true pleasure is not found in achieving a state of feverish satisfaction, but rather in escaping the pangs of discomfort, both physical discomfort and, even more critically, mental turmoil. It is an absence, not a presence. We must understand this paradox, to find joy through negation. We have spent chapters observing how easily modern life mistakes distraction for fulfillment or exhaustion for achievement. The promise has always been that the next goal, the next purchase, the next viral moment will finally bring lasting contentment. Yet, as we saw, this pattern leads only to a compounding debt of desire and disappointment. Epicurus offers a radical conceptual subtraction. He asks us not to pile on more experiences, but to strip away what is unnecessary. He does not suggest becoming ascetic merely for its own sake, but rather understanding that our minds are constantly barraged by needs we have accumulated, needs fueled by society's endless advertising and the comparison of lives lived through glass screens. The fundamental question shifts. Is pleasure about intense, sudden peaks of delight, or is it about maintaining a stable, calm baseline? Epicurus argues for the latter. He defines what he calls ataraxia, a state of undisturbed tranquility. It is not simply being happy. Rather, it is being free from worry, free from fear, and free from anxiety regarding the future. This mental stillness becomes its own profound pleasure. Consider the nature of suffering. Suffering rarely arrives in a single, massive blow. More often, it builds slowly through small points of unnecessary agitation. It begins with wishing for something you do not have, or imagining what might go wrong tomorrow. These are the tiny weeds of the soul garden, and they choke out simple peace. To achieve ataraxia, therefore, requires a kind of philosophical diet. We must learn to distinguish between desires that are natural and necessary, the basic need for food, warmth, and shelter, and those that are unnatural or unnecessary. The desire for fame is often such an expenditure. The desire for extravagant wealth when simple sustenance is available presents nothing but worry. The joy derived from a deeply satisfying conversation shared over humble bread far outweighs the thrill of a grand banquet consumed in isolation. One fills not just the stomach, but the very inner reservoirs of the soul. The nourishment is therefore qualitative, drawn from simplicity and connection, rather than quantitative, derived from sheer abundance. This means that much of our daily intellectual struggle, the anxious anticipation of rewards, the worry over reputation, the constant striving to keep up, is based on false premises. We are confusing activity with fulfillment and busyness with meaning. When we cease viewing pleasure as a dramatic climax and begin seeing it instead as a quiet return to equilibrium, the entire landscape of human desire changes. It becomes clear that true comfort is less about adding things to our lives and far more about subtracting those persistent anxieties that clutter the mind. The ultimate aim is therefore not sensory overload, but mental sufficiency. It is cultivating a rich interior life that is immune to the whims of fortune or the fickle judgment of others. We have spoken of tranquility. We have dismantled the myths surrounding pleasure, learning that true joy is not found in lavish feasts or glittering accomplishments, but in the quiet absence of suffering. But peace is rarely gifted. It must be protected, and often, what threatens our inner calm are the shadows within ourselves, the persistent whispers of fear. These fears are formidable beasts. They do not roar from outside. They grow deep inside the architecture of the mind. We face them daily, unseen enemies that feed on our lack of understanding and our unresolved anxieties. Think first of mortality. The absolute finality of death is perhaps humanity's deepest terror. It looms large in our imagination, a dark curtain suggesting an end to everything we value, all relationships, all ambitions, even the self. We spend immense energy running from this thought, building elaborate monuments to avoid confronting it. But how much of this frantic struggle is built upon a fundamental misunderstanding? The ancient minds taught us that what we fear most does not hold the power that our emotional imagination grants it. Death, in itself, is simply a transition, a state of non-existence concerning which nothing can be felt or known. By understanding its nature through reason, we strip this monstrous figure of its terrible force. To accept finitude is paradoxically to liberate life. We have explored the frantic noise of modern expectation. We saw how our minds are constantly pulling us forward, chasing some invisible horizon that promises ultimate satisfaction. But what lies at the end of that chase? Is it true happiness, or merely a different kind of exhausting yearning? Epicurus spent his days within quiet gardens, far from the clamor of public life. He taught us that the greatest rewards are found not in acquisition, but in subtraction, the careful removal of what we assume we need, only to realize how much weight it was carrying. The path to tranquility is not paved with grand gestures or sudden fortune. Rather, it requires a deep, persistent clearing of the self. It demands an understanding of where our discomfort truly originates. This leads us to worry. Worry itself is not inherently bad. It is merely a signpost pointing toward an unresolved disagreement, a misalignment between what we desire and what we perceive as possible. But when this little internal miscommunication becomes habitual, fueled by false beliefs about the world, it builds into towering anxiety. Worry, therefore, is simply organized ignorance. Epicurus argued that much of our suffering stems not from external events, such as bad weather or lost fortune, but from how we mistake those events for final judgments about our inherent worth or future stability. We build elaborate mental scaffolding around potential threats: the fear of failure, the dread of scarcity, the uncertainty of tomorrow. These are castles built entirely out of speculative worry. So, if anxiety is rooted in ignorance, then peace must be found through knowledge. It requires a systematic dismantling of our most deeply held fears and misconceptions about life's nature. The mind, like any garden, accumulates weeds. Sometimes those weeds look familiar. They are the voices telling us we cannot thrive without immense wealth. They whisper that deep pleasure is only accessible after great suffering. They insist that love requires perpetual drama. Our task is to identify these toxic assumptions and pull them out, root by slow root. Epicurus gives us a rigorous intellectual toolkit for self-examination. He asks us not just what we should feel, but why we believe we need to feel it in a certain way. When we analyze the premises of worry, the what-ifs, we find that most are based on irrational assumptions about control, permanence, and value. I fear the things I cannot predict. I crave the certainty that nature will remain benevolent, that my relationships will never fail, and that death is a final catastrophe. These three fears form some of the most potent pillars supporting our worry. They feel monumental when we are caught beneath them, but upon closer inspection, they crumble into mere philosophical misunderstandings. Consider the concern for external validation. We spend so much emotional energy trying to prove ourselves worthy to the judgment of others, of friends, family, strangers on a feed. Yet, this striving is a boundless expenditure that yields diminishing returns. Each compliment received provides only temporary buoyancy before the desire for the next dose begins. It is an unsustainable diet for the soul. Epicurus gently redirects our gaze inward, teaching us to become connoisseurs of our own internal state. We must learn to differentiate between natural needs, the need for water, the need for shelter, the basic companionship that soothes loneliness, and unnatural desires, the endless craving for status, the superficial desire for novelty, the anxiety that keeps us permanently primed for disappointment. The most radical shift in thought is realizing that contentment is not a destination reached by external conquest. It is an internal architecture built by understanding fundamental truths. We must stop treating our lives like a series of escalating crises and start viewing them as cycles of simple moments that possess inherent worth. This process requires us to understand what actually governs human suffering. Epicurus reminds us that the deepest source of pain lies in miscalculating desires. When we desire something impossibly grand, or cling desperately to something perishable, we set ourselves up for inevitable disappointment and subsequent worry. Therefore, freedom begins with a disciplined restraint on our expectations. We must examine the bedrock beliefs upon which our worries are founded. For many of us, worrying is merely substituting imagined future suffering for the quiet acceptance of present reality. It is an act of mental self-torture in the service of preemptive control that never arrives. True peace, ataraxia, is not found by eliminating potential threats, for life remains inherently unpredictable, but by training the mind to accept uncertainty as a constant element of existence. This acceptance is not resignation, it is profound strength. We are invited to live simply enough that our emotional bandwidth is conserved for the things that truly matter: deep connection, intellectual curiosity, and the quiet appreciation for simple sensory pleasures. We practice cultivating a state of non-attachment, recognizing that holding too tightly to happiness or rejecting too forcefully potential pain ultimately causes more distress than accepting life's natural ebb and flow. The journey through these pillars is not swift. It requires daily attention, much like weeding a garden. One day, the fear of reputation will rise up. Another, the craving for status might tempt us into comparison. Each time we pause to ask, is this worry based on a necessary truth, or merely an ancient, comfortable fiction? We gain a fraction of inner freedom. By systematically identifying and dissolving these flawed mental structures, these pillars, we can finally stand upon solid ground, grounded in the reality of sufficiency, anchored in the quiet resilience that comes from knowing what truly makes life worth living. Simple friendship, unhurried conversation, and the knowledge that enough is already present. We have traveled through the quiet philosophy of Epicurus, learning to redefine what happiness means. We discovered that true pleasure is not found in the excess or the accumulation of things, but rather in a profound state of stillness, a freedom from worry, a return to ataraxia. Our focus has been on subtraction, subtracting unnecessary desires, stripping away the anxieties fed by comparison and expectation. But even after defining this internal tranquility, it is easy to become complacent, to mistake merely knowing the philosophy for truly living it. The intellectual understanding of peace must translate into a lived architecture of the self. This chapter concerns building that fortress, the inner citadel. We have journeyed far from the noisy expectations of the world. We learned that true joy does not come from grasping or accumulating, but from subtraction, from stripping away what is unnecessary until we reach a state of deep tranquility. But perhaps we still misunderstand where that simple peace originates. We believe it must be found in some grand achievement, some ultimate discovery. Yet, Epicurus guides us back to the most elemental reality, our very own physical selves, and the profound satisfaction drawn from meeting the basic requirements of existence. The core lesson now is about simplicity itself. It is not a moral choice or an aesthetic preference. It is a fundamental philosophy applied to your hunger, your thirst, your need for shelter. When we elevate desire into something grand, we create corresponding anxieties. We become slaves to potential discomfort. The fear of being hungry when there should be plenty, the worry that water might fail us on a dry day. Think about basic needs. The craving for bread and clean water was once treated as merely biological facts. Today, however, our culture surrounds these simple requirements with layers of complex desires. We do not just want food, We want gourmet meals, rare ingredients, exotic preparations, presented in breathtaking ways. And this difference is everything. Consider the vast disparity between necessity and luxury. Necessity asks, is there enough to sustain life? Luxury whispers, how wonderful will it be if there were more than enough? The disciplined mind, the tranquil heart, does not chase whispered promises of extravagance. It recognizes sufficiency. True satiety is a quiet recognition that what is present is adequate for a life well lived. Epicurus showed us that the simple act of sharing a meal was infinitely richer than any extravagant feast eaten in isolation. A handful of good bread, dipped into strong wine, shared with trusted friends. This composition held more genuine pleasure and deeper peace than countless coins spent on momentary display. The mistake we are constantly making is confusing abundance with enjoyment. We assume that the material volume of our life determines its qualitative depth. But deep down, deep in the quiet chambers of the self, we know better. The soul yearns not for more objects, but for less agitation. This realization requires an almost brutal honesty about your own desires. When you feel the ache of wanting something beyond what is necessary, the new gadget, the bigger house, the endless vacation, you must pause. Pause and ask, is this want truly feeding my tranquility? Does it remove a source of worry or pain? Or is it merely building another precarious pillar upon which your happiness depends? The most profound pleasure, we learn, is characterized by its ease. It requires no planning, no large effort, no intense financial outlay, and certainly no fear of failure. The simple comfort of friendship shared over basic sustenance exemplifies this perfectly. This brings us to the concept of simple thirst. Thirst is biological. It signals an immediate need for water. When you are genuinely thirsty, your focus is singular, your desire direct. There is no complicated narrative attached to the act of quenching that thirst, no worrying about the source's purity, or how best to frame the experience for others. The desire simply points to relief. The art, then, is to bring that radical simplicity to every facet of existence, to treat your emotional needs and intellectual cravings with the same minimalist rigor you would apply to hydration. We must learn to differentiate between natural desires, those necessary for survival, food, shelter, companionship, and manufactured desires. Manufactured desires are built by society, shaped by advertising and comparison. They tell you that a good life requires endless upward mobility, an ever-increasing circle of possessions, and a continuous performance for strangers. The philosophy here is deeply practical. It is a method of constant recalibration. Every time you feel the familiar prickle of wanting something unnecessary, you must invoke this pause. You acknowledge the desire but refuse to treat it as a mandate for your happiness. You reaffirm that contentment resides in enoughness. The luxury banquet remains an impressive spectacle, certainly. It speaks to skill and resources. But the humble gathering, the small circle gathered under low light, sharing simple bread and deep conversation, that is where true nourishment happens. That atmosphere breathes genuine security, the kind of quietude that dissolves anxiety. Consider your friends. Friendship, too, follows this law of simplicity. The bond does not require grand gestures or expensive outings to prove its worth. It simply requires presence. Shared silence over simple meals speaks volumes more than any public display of camaraderie ever could. This entire chapter is a call back to the self, to examine the core architecture of your own satisfaction. Are you building your inner life upon the flimsy foundations of constantly acquiring, or are you anchoring it into the solid rock of gratitude for what sustains you right now? The quiet joy found in simple sustenance, the gentle warmth of food enjoyed slowly, the deep comfort of companionship during a basic shared meal. This is the zenith. This is where Epicurus revealed the ultimate secret, that the most profound richness is always characterized by its lack of need and its sheer, effortless presence. You are not meant to run toward an ever-receding horizon of acquisition. You are meant to root yourself firmly in the solid ground of sufficiency. The simple thirst reminds us that sometimes the greatest philosophical pursuit is simply remembering how good it feels to be satisfied. Through all these lessons of self-mastery, of identifying the foolish fears that plague us, of stripping away unnecessary cravings, and of learning to find sufficiency in simple bread and water, we have been guided toward a singular realization. That inner peace is never achieved alone. It requires connection. For humanity is not built for solitary contemplation. We are inherently creatures meant for community. The greatest garden, the truest source of tranquility, cannot be found within the self in isolation. It blossoms through another person. Epicurus was not merely a philosopher of solitude. He understood that while the most profound work must occur in the quiet corner of one's mind, the support structure for that work, the gentle cushion upon which the soul can rest, is woven from the bonds we share with others. He taught us that isolation is not freedom. It is simply emptiness. The void remains even after all anxiety has been systematically dismantled. To fill that void, to truly feel anchored in this transient existence, requires trust. It demands friendship. We spoke earlier of ataraxia, the profound state of being free from disturbance. We learned how to dismantle the worrying structures built by fear and false desire. But a mind purified of anxiety can become brittle. It needs warmth. A spirit cleansed of worry must be gently nourished, and in that nourishment, we find true kinship. The quality of our life does not hinge on the depth of our knowledge, nor on the height of our achievements. It rests instead upon the gentle reliability of a chosen companionship. This is the ultimate investment, the human bond. A friend is more than just company. They are an essential philosophical partner, a living mirror that reflects back to us not only who we are, but who we can safely become. Consider the sheer weight of modern life's performance anxiety. We see ourselves through filtered lenses, the perfect vacation, the impeccable career milestones, the effortless joy captured for public consumption. This creates an exhausting mandate that we must always be performing our best selves. It is a relentless show where the applause never ends and the curtain never falls. The emotional fatigue of this constant performance depletes us far faster than any material want. Epicurus offered a radical counter-narrative. He taught that some pleasures are fundamentally interpersonal. These include the quiet act of sharing a meal, the mutual comfort found in a shared silence, or simply the simple honesty exchanged across a small table. These moments do not require grand gestures. They thrive on understated intimacy and reliable goodwill. The true measure of a life well lived is not visible upon one's ledger of accomplishments, but rather in the accumulated memory of smiles shared with trusted individuals. It resides in the effortless ease of being understood, without needing to explain or defend oneself constantly. Friendship serves as this essential counterbalance to anxiety. While we learn to control our inner landscape through discipline and thought, the art of cultivating internal resilience, friendship provides a safe external anchor point. It is within the circle of friends that we can practice these philosophical principles in their most immediate, vital form. When one friend sees another struggling with the weight of unwarranted expectation, they do not merely offer platitudes. They offer presence. They simply sit together in the quiet truth until the anxious noise fades. This communal witness is a profound antidote to existential dread. This chapter requires us to redefine what investment means. We spend money on things that promise joy, a fleeting trip, an expensive gadget, status symbols. These purchases offer temporary distraction at best, and sometimes genuine emotional debt at worst. Friendship, however, is the one investment with demonstrable compound interest. The more deeply you tend it, through listening when it is inconvenient to do so, through sharing vulnerability even when it feels risky, through maintaining reliability even when it is unrewarding, the greater your return of peace becomes. A true friend does not ask us to be perfect. They simply accept the messy reality of our existence. They allow us to fail privately and recover safely within their sphere. This sanctuary is invaluable. It allows the mind, after learning philosophical subtraction and self-sufficiency, a place to rest its guard. It permits vulnerability without fear of judgment or abandonment. The essence of Epicurean friendship was always simplicity, removing unnecessary complexity. The deepest connections were not found in grand balls or intellectual debates with strangers. They were forged over quiet cups of wine, sharing the wisdom gained from hours of patient conversation. These moments reinforce a core truth: that belonging is one of our most fundamental and non-negotiable needs. To be friends means to share not just physical space, but an emotional philosophy. It means mutually agreeing on the principle that worry is unnecessary and that simple contentment, ataraxia, is the highest good. A friend validates this choice with their own continued presence. They act as a living testament to the idea that true pleasure lies in moderated joy, shared resources, and mutual understanding. The lesson here, therefore, is one of radical prioritization. We must dedicate our emotional energy not to those who merely admire us from a distance, those whose regard costs nothing, but to those who genuinely see us, for better or worse, and remain committed nonetheless. They are the co-architects of a quiet, sustainable life. In their care, we find that even the most disciplined mind can afford to be truly soft. And this gentle softness, supported by reliable affection, is ultimately what allows us to live fully in this garden of quiet contentment. We have journeyed far from the noise of expectation. We learn to define pleasure not as wild excess, but as a quiet state, the absence of pain and worry. We found that true peace begins with withdrawing our gaze from the endless metrics of achievement and directing it inward. If philosophy is simply an academic subject, then perhaps we have misunderstood its purpose entirely. It is not something studied in dusty halls. It is a practice of living. Philosophy must be medicine. It must cure the chronic restlessness of the modern soul. To be philosophic is to treat oneself with intention, examining the faulty assumptions that keep us perpetually anxious. Think of the mind right now. Our thoughts are restless currents, often pulled by tides of comparison or fear. These currents tell us we need more wealth, more recognition, a better version of ourselves tomorrow. But these desires, when constantly pursued in the external world, become ceaseless sources of disappointment and exhaustion. The medicine taught here is not to chase new goals, but to quiet the mechanism of wanting itself. To learn that satisfaction is a state of being, not an achievement to be reached. This understanding requires us to treat our anxieties like physical ailments. We must identify the root causes. What exactly are we ill from? Is it the fear of death, the misunderstanding of fate, or perhaps it is the more insidious ailment, worrying about things that have no power over us? Epicurus taught us a systematic subtraction. He showed us that much of our suffering is not due to unavoidable pain, but due to unnecessary, complex worries built upon ignorance. The practice of philosophy as medicine thus demands radical self-examination. It asks us to become the diagnosticians of our own emotional lives. We must observe which thoughts are helpful and which are merely elaborate constructs of fear. If a thought tells you that your worth depends on applause or financial success, it is not a truth. It is an overactive symptom requiring correction. This self-correction leads us to the core principle of intellectual hygiene, simplicity of desire. The body requires food and water. These are our natural necessities. These desires are simple, easy to satisfy, and when met, they bring lasting peace. But we have allowed our minds to invent luxuries that blur the line between need and vanity. We crave experiences, the perfect career move, the ideal relationship, the flawless Instagram feed. But these often only create a craving for the next, creating an endless cycle of debt, emotional or material. The medicine suggests a discipline of recognition, what is truly necessary and what is merely culturally constructed. When we practice this discerning eye, we begin to prune our desires. We are not sacrificing joy. We are eliminating the things that distract us from deep, quiet contentment. This ability to say no to superficial wants is one of the most profound acts of self-care. Moreover, philosophy as medicine must address connection. The inner citadel, while crucial for survival against external chaos, is meant to be lived within a community. We learned that, while emotional resilience comes from mastering ourselves, building our own sturdy walls, we cannot live life in absolute isolation. Friendship, therefore, becomes the prescription. It is not just an optional pleasure, it is essential sustenance. It provides the testing ground for philosophy itself. A close friendship requires vulnerability and honesty, demanding a constant application of the principles we are learning. We must test our beliefs about self-sufficiency against the reality of relying on another human being. The journey, therefore, is not linear. It involves moments of deep internal focus, like sitting alone with your own worried thoughts, followed by the gentle, supportive interaction that reminds you that humanity is inherently meant to be shared. The simple dinner together, the quiet conversation under the stars. These moments prove that our highest forms of satisfaction do not require spectacle or great wealth. They require presence and reliable company. We have moved from worrying about the abstract, the fate of empires, the displeasure of gods, to mastering the concrete reality of the next hour. We are learning to anchor ourselves in the breathable space between one thought and the next. This is where true freedom resides, not in having endless options, but in accepting the sufficiency of what already is. It is the radical acceptance that life's deepest pleasures are often found quietly, unannounced, and completely free of expectation. The process never ends. Like tending a garden or maintaining a body, philosophical practice requires daily attention. We must remain vigilant against the subtle encroachment of old fears, the faint echo suggesting we need more than enough, or that contentment is transient. It is this gentle, continuous withdrawal from anxiety that defines our renewed path. To live philosophically is to commit to lifelong mental maintenance, ensuring that our minds are not merely full of thoughts, but filled with peace. We have traveled far from the noise of expectation and the endless ache of aspiration. We learned that the life many pursue, the life defined by status, wealth, and constant achievement, is a treadmill leading only to exhaustion. The journey has been one of quiet subtraction, stripping away layers of misunderstanding about what makes us happy or complete. The core realization is this: suffering does not come from external misfortune. It comes from internal error, from mistaking the necessary for the luxurious and the transient goal for lasting peace. If we understood this much, perhaps our anxious modern spirit would finally find rest. This understanding requires discipline, a meticulous attention to what enters our minds. Like tending a sacred garden, we must learn to prune the wild overgrowth of desire. This is not about becoming poor or retiring from the world. It is an internal act of radical clarity. We have traveled through the careful architecture of the self. We learn to redefine pleasure not as excess, but as a quiet state, a freedom from pain and worry. We found refuge in the simple nourishment of the body and the unwavering solace of genuine friendship. We dedicated ourselves to building an inner citadel, one where external chaos could not shake us. But achieving this masterful balance is not merely about refining our appetites or managing our emotions. It requires a final, profound surrender, a willingness to accept that the tapestry of life is woven from threads we cannot choose. Consider moments when everything feels wrong, when effort yields nothing and planning collapses into unexpected disorder. In these moments, our instinct is to fight, to rage against the unfairness, the randomness, or the perceived injustice of things. We grasp desperately at control, believing that if only we could predict the next hour, if only we could smooth away every wrinkle in fate's script, would peace finally descend. But life often refuses our perfect models. It throws detours, unexpected losses, and irreversible changes at us. And it is here, standing at the edge of things that refuse to bend to our will, that true philosophy begins its deepest work. The greatest struggle we face is not with others, or even with ourselves, but with inevitability itself. The desire to control outcome, the insistence on that perfect guarantee, is perhaps the most exhausting modern burden of all. We live perpetually in a state of preemptive anxiety, constantly worrying about a future that may never materialize as we imagine it. This worry is merely resistance. It is the refusal to acknowledge the power and the necessary wildness of change. To truly understand acceptance means going far beyond passive resignation. It is not simply saying it is what it is while sinking into apathy. Rather, it is an active, disciplined alignment with reality as it unfolds. It is recognizing that resisting what is only creates a secondary pain, the pain of the struggle itself. This realization unlocks a profound kind of muscular peace. We must learn to distinguish between what we can influence and what remains irrevocably outside our domain. We can govern our intentions, we can refine our character, and we can nurture our bonds. But we cannot choose when sickness strikes, we cannot dictate the economy's cycles, and we certainly cannot control the actions or failings of other human beings. These matters belong to a larger, incomprehensible flow, the cosmic river of things. The ancient wisdom echoes here, suggesting that true freedom is found precisely in relinquishing the claim to perfect foresight. We must embrace what Epicurus called fate, not as a punishment, but as material, as raw stuff of which our lives are built. This leads us toward an idea that sometimes feels paradoxical, embracing the unchangeable, not merely enduring it, but loving it. To accept destiny, this is to understand that every loss, every frustration, and every sudden deviation is not a mistake or a setback, but rather the necessary ingredient for who we are meant to become. It means viewing life not as an itinerary to be followed, but as an unfolding experiment to be fully inhabited. The challenge, then, becomes practicing this active non-resistance daily. When hardship arrives, our immediate reaction must shift from "how do I fix this?" to "what does this demand of me now?" This is the point of leverage, the moment where philosophy moves from concept to lived action. It requires cultivating a radical mental humility, the understanding that there are fundamental realities, laws, and forces at play, far grander than our immediate emotional narratives. By accepting these boundaries, we find ourselves suddenly vast, unburdened by impossible expectations. We drop the futile weight of absolute control. This acceptance is not the death of desire. Rather, it is the purification of it. It does not mean ceasing to strive for a good life, but redefining what good means. Goodness becomes synonymous with resilience, with graceful navigation through chaos, and with finding richness in sufficiency, regardless of surrounding circumstances. The practice demands deep courage, the courage to let go of imagined perfection, the courage to greet the unexpected not with dread, but with steady curiosity. It is remembering that life's value resides not in its smooth execution, but in its brutal, beautiful reality, the full spectrum of loss and gain, challenge and grace. Ultimately, accepting what cannot be changed allows us to redirect all our energy inward. If we spend our vitality fighting the inevitable tide, we exhaust ourselves and achieve nothing but exhaustion. But if we accept that tide and use our inner discipline merely to steer our own spirit against it, then there is boundless energy left over. The good life, therefore, is not one free from difficulty. It is one approached with unshakable, elegant composure in the face of all difficulty. It is finding peace not despite the flow, but because we are fully and wholeheartedly part of it. This comprehensive acceptance, this amor fati, is perhaps the highest form of wisdom. Realizing that to truly live well, we must first learn to simply let go. We have journeyed through the difficult work of defining happiness, realizing that it is not found in accumulation or frantic pursuit. We learned to prune desires, distinguishing between what we truly need and what society tells us we should want. This process demanded a subtle withdrawal, a turning away from the noise of constant obligation. The modern world demands participation everywhere. It requires our attendance at endless events, our availability for every committee, our energy for every sprawling commitment. We are taught that worth is measured by the sheer volume of our involvement. We feel obligated to say yes, even when our very spirit whispers a polite protest. The cost of this overcommitment, however, is profound depletion. Our minds become cluttered with the expectations of others, and our inner peace becomes merely another item on a task list. Epicurus understood that life's greatest luxury is not material abundance, but time, and true mastery over oneself requires space to think, space to rest, and crucially, space to simply be. This chapter calls for the wisdom of withdrawal, not as an act of retreat from life itself, but as a selective turning inward toward what genuinely nourishes the soul. Consider the concept of connection. We have established that the deepest connections are founded on simplicity and trust. Yet, we live in cultures that conflate quantity with quality. We mistake being seen by many for truly belonging to a few. We accumulate social obligations like trophies, believing that broader engagement equals a richer life. But every relationship requires an expenditure of energy, and if the returns are only mutual exhaustion, then the investment is unwise. The gentle withdrawal, therefore, is not isolation. It is disciplined selectivity. It is the radical act of choosing what to say no to, so that we may be entirely present for what truly matters. Say no to the obligation because it steals your morning. Say no to the project that will consume every single evening. Say no to the performance demanded by the crowd when all you crave is silence. The anxiety of overcommitment arises from a fear of missing out, or FOMO. It tells us we must be everywhere at once, lest we fail to participate in the grand narrative of modern existence. But that grand narrative is often hollow, built on fleeting attention and manufactured urgency. True living requires contrast. periods of deep engagement followed by restorative stillness. This rhythm allows the soul to process connection without breaking into exhaustion. To withdraw gently means establishing boundaries with grace and conviction. It demands a shift in identity, from being a perpetually available resource to being a carefully cultivated source of peace. We are learning that our truest value lies not in how many things we can manage, but in the depth with which we can inhabit a few chosen moments. The gentle withdrawal allows us to refine our inner circle until it becomes a small, intensely nurtured garden, a counterpoint to the overwhelming sprawl of modern social life. These are the friendships that require no grand gestures or public maintenance. They are simply reliable. They are places where one can shed the mask of constant striving and simply exist, unburdened by the expectation of performance. This careful trimming of commitments is perhaps the most practical application of Epicurean philosophy for the contemporary mind. It is an active rebellion against exhaustion. It affirms that sufficiency is found in limitation, a limited circle of profound connection, a limited set of needs to manage, and a protected space where peace can finally settle. This withdrawal does not mean opting out of the world. It means opting into a meaningful corner of it. It means being fully present for the shared meal with one trusted friend, rather than merely checking off an attendance list at a large gathering. It is choosing deep depth over scattered breadth, understanding that quality connection offers nourishment far superior to superficial visibility. The cultivation of this inner life becomes our highest art. We are protecting not just time, but our vital energy, the precious resource required for cultivating wisdom and quiet joy. To withdraw gently is simply to choose peace as the most vital obligation of all. We have traveled far from the roar of expectation and the exhausting pursuit of the external. We started by learning that much of our anxiety springs not from reality itself, but from the sheer weight of what we believe we should be achieving. This internal labor has been demanding, a daily pruning of desires, a systematic unlearning of comparison, a careful cultivation of boundaries. Now, however, we arrive at the destination, the realization of a life that is quietly full. Imagine this moment. The frantic notifications have faded into silence. The pressure to achieve, the relentless need for recognition, these clamorous voices are finally muted. We find ourselves in a space defined not by what we possess or how many people know us, but by the quiet resonance of simple presence. This is the reward of inner work. It is peace itself. The journey toward this fulfillment was never about accumulating more things, nor even accumulating experiences. It was always an inward turning, a shift from looking outward for validation to cultivating a sustainable source of contentment within ourselves. We have moved beyond merely defining happiness as the absence of pain, which is ataraxia. We now understand it to be an active state, a life lived so skillfully that worry simply cannot take root. This quiet fullness is not luxurious or indulgent. It does not require grand gestures or expensive escapes. Instead, it resides in the steady rhythm of simple living, the taste of good bread shared with those who know you truly, the warmth of conversation that requires no performance, the pleasure found in the company of friends whose regard for you is unconditional. The art of this life is subtraction. We are not trying to add more joys. We are patiently subtracting all the unnecessary desires and anxieties that have cluttered our inner landscape over decades. Each worry about a future failure, each craving for status, each fear of abandonment, these things are gently let go, recognized as mental debris that only weighs us down. Consider the deepest human needs: food, shelter, belonging. These are the pillars upon which true satisfaction rests. When we anchor our sense of self-worth in these fundamental necessities and treat them not as mere survival means, but as sources of deep gratitude, a profound shift occurs. We realize that the lavish banquet is merely fuel for another night of performance, whereas a simple meal shared with kindred spirits nourishes the soul. The anxiety that once governed us, the fear monster whispering about death or poverty, the craving monster demanding endless progress, loses its power in this serene environment. The mind, having mastered its own architecture, becomes an immune system against the chaos of expectation. It can accept change not as a threat to our stability, but as simply another element of existence. This quiet fullness is thus defined by connection. While self-mastery allowed us to keep the peace inside ourselves, the citadel intact, it was the rediscovery of community that truly completed the picture. Friendship emerged, strong and reliable, not from shared adventures or grand statements, but from mutual vulnerability in times of ordinary life. It is this gentle, sustained give and take that confirms our humanity and anchors us to reality. The greatest investments are the emotional ones, the investment in another person's quiet existence, into their simple well-being. It requires a deliberate discipline, this path. Like tending a garden, contentment does not bloom simply because we wish it to. We must show up every day, continuing the daily pruning of our thoughts. When the whispers of what if begin again, when the urge to compare ourselves to others flares bright and urgent, we pause. We recall the quiet truth. That sufficient is enough. This continuous state of graceful sufficiency requires us also to know the wisdom of withdrawal. It means setting boundaries not as acts of selfishness, but as necessary acts of preservation for our most vital energy. Saying no to an obligation does not diminish our worth. It elevates the quality of the yes we reserve for those who genuinely sustain us. The consequence of this disciplined living is a profound shift in perspective on time itself. Time ceases to be a relentless measure of external achievement and becomes instead a series of beautifully unhurried moments. We are present in the shade of the afternoon, attentive to the curve of a shared cup, absorbed in the cadence of true conversation. The life we have rediscovered is therefore not a state of perpetual idleness, but a highly selective engagement with reality. It is an active choosing deep connection over wide obligation, choosing the simple solace of presence over the manufactured excitement of excess, choosing understanding over worry. This realization brings us to a quiet acceptance, the gentle recognition that life will always be unpredictable. Some events will happen outside our control, requiring nothing more than calm observation and unwavering composure. Our freedom is found not in predicting or controlling these external variables, but solely in deciding how we choose to respond to them. We compose ourselves amid the inevitable chaos, using wisdom as our steady lantern. The quiet life, therefore, is a masterpiece of intentionality. It is a sustained practice of finding profound joy in the immediate reality, the simple conversation, the good wine, the reliable presence of others, because we have learned that true wealth never leaves us. It merely requires us to stop running and start noticing. The garden does not offer an escape. It offers a way back to oneself. For too long, we have treated peace as a destination, a finish line after a grueling race of achievement and acquisition. We thought that happiness was something earned, a grand prize waiting at the end of endless striving. The gentle wisdom accumulated here suggests otherwise. The garden is not a final haven, it is a practice. It is the continuous act of tending, day after day, recognizing that true contentment is not a static state to be achieved, but a delicate rhythm to be maintained. Life itself is much like this garden. We must approach our own inner selves with patience and persistent care. We have learned to identify what genuinely fuels us, the simple nourishing meal, the genuine depth of shared silence, the steady hand of a trusted friend. These are the vital blooms we must cultivate. Conversely, we have seen the weeds, the comparison trap, the relentless need for external applause, the anxiety fueled by imagining future failures. These weeds choke out quiet joy, requiring continuous vigilance. The most profound lesson is that philosophy itself is not a syllabus to be mastered or a trophy to be displayed. It is a way of movement. It is how we choose to walk through life's unavoidable complexity. Each morning brings new challenges and fresh streams of distraction, demanding a renewed commitment to mindful presence. This continuous self-examination is perhaps the hardest work of all. To constantly ask ourselves what truly matters, to sift through the weight of expectation and superficial want, requires courage. It demands that we regularly prune our own desires. This means saying no not just to other people, but to certain ways of thinking. It means letting go of the need to predict outcomes or control the feelings of those we love. The cultivation of the inner life is a sustained journey of acceptance and detachment. We must practice discerning between what belongs entirely within our sphere of influence, our intentions, our reactions, our immediate attention, and everything else that swirls beyond our grasp. This requires us to acknowledge reality as it unfolds, stripping away the protective layers of what if. When we approach life this way, anticipating every gust and predicting every outcome, we find ourselves exhausted before the day has truly begun. We are always fighting a battle against imagined threats. True freedom arrives when we accept the present moment's full reality, its imperfections, its beauty, its unpredictable currents. This acceptance is not passive resignation. It is an active choice to stand firm, root deep in our own established values. The quiet fullness life that was revealed to us is characterized by intentionality. Every action must be measured against the standard of sufficiency. Is this desire genuinely necessary? Will satisfying it fundamentally change who I am or how I feel when the moment passes? If the answer points toward complication, anxiety, or dependence on external validation, then the impulse should be gently dismissed. This process is a constant conversation with oneself. It means pausing before judgment, choosing curiosity instead of condemnation. It means recognizing that true security does not come from having impenetrable walls around the heart, but from understanding its capacity to remain open and resilient despite outside blows. Our resilience grows in these moments of necessary vulnerability. The garden teaches us that growth is messy. Some weeds will inevitably pop up. Some desires will reassert themselves with loud urgency. The skill lies not in achieving a perfectly pristine state, for such perfection does not exist in the human condition, but in maintaining the practice of removal. To gently pull the undesirable thought, to calmly redirect the agitated mind back to the reliable anchor of the present breath. And this understanding brings us to the most fundamental truth of our quiet life. That profound peace is inherently localized. It cannot be found by journeying away from trouble. It must be constructed within the immediate space we occupy, between one heartbeat and the next, between the awareness and the passing thought. It is a commitment to living well enough, to desiring nothing more than what sustains us in simplicity, reliable connection, physical nourishment, intellectual curiosity, and the quiet understanding of our own limitations. This life requires not massive effort, but persistent.